The topic is DAIR or removal. I think we've talked about removal, so I'm going to stick with DAIR because when you don't do a DAIR, then you would end up removing the implant. So we'll talk about the definition of DAIR, why you do it, when you do it, the where, how, and the aftercare. Okay. So various strategies for treatment of prosthetic joint infections. So the first is antibiotic suppression in poor hosts, debridement, antibiotics, and implant retention. That's what DAIR stands for. And then you have excision arthroplasty and then exchange arthroplasty in 1 or 2 stages, and eventually salvage procedures like amputation, which was mentioned earlier today. So this is the evolution, why we do it. So there's a lot of evidence behind it. The earlier studies showed pathetic results. Okay, so 79% failure rate, it's almost not worth doing. You can't counsel a patient to say that this operation is going to fail in 80% of the times. But that was then. Okay. However, they did pick up that if you pick this infection up very early, i.e. within 6 days, then your results were better. Fast forward to 2012, the Swiss group with Zimmerle's group. So if the duration of symptoms were less than 3 weeks, the implant was stable, there was no sinus, and the organisms were sensitive to surface-acting antibiotics. They demonstrated an 80% success rate. So now it's switched around, and the procedure is almost worth doing. Lots of studies back this up. This is a summary of the early DAIR results, and you can see a variation between about 30% to 80%. Okay? So a wide variation in success rates. Sukayama's group, so 71% success rate, and the key messages there were the debridement has to be absolutely ruthless. So radical debridement, no minimal incision surgery, no arthroscopic surgery. 71% success rate, a defined surgical tactic, and any modular elements need to be changed. What constitute modular elements is up for debate. So the best case scenario for a success in DAIR would be duration of symptoms less than 3 weeks, a stable implant, there is no sinus, and susceptibility of the organism. So you need to have the organism in the first place, and it needs to have a sensitive antibiogram for you to consider doing a DAIR. Does that mean you should not do a DAIR in other situations? No, this is your best case scenario. Then how to do it? The setup. You need to find out about the index operation and implant details, especially if this was not done in your unit. You need to find out what the implants are so that you have the modular exchanges available. You need to have those modular components, withhold antibiotics if possible. However, if the patient is septic or is then you don't have a choice, but you liaise with your microbiologist so they're aware what antibiotics you're using. Somebody mentioned earlier that, so the last scenario, these are long procedures. So you need your anesthetist on board, especially if you have a new anesthetist, then warn them that there'll be a big septic bolus liberated in the bloodstream, and these patients can be very unstable. Make sure they're not behind on the fluid balance for these and cross-match about 4 to 6 units because they can bleed like a stink. Approach, excise scar, we use the 2-knife technique. So you use 2 22 blades joined together and excise the scar. Extensile approach, like I said, there is no place for minimally invasive surgery in these cases. Explore the old approach. Implants are exposed and then dislocate the liners or the modular components and then carry on with your surgery. So that's the 2-incision of sort of 2-knife approach, and then you excise the scar completely. Sampling is as you need a dedicated sample tray. You need separate forceps, separate knives, and then they go straight into the pot, and you don't want those samples sitting around. You want them going straight to the lab so that they can start the culturing process immediately. So this is where your liaison with your microbiologist is helpful. Histology is also helpful. We don't use frozen sections so much nowadays, but we do send a specimen for histopathology. At least 5 samples plus or minus a fluid sample. Like I said, urgent transfer to the lab and prolonged cultures. So at least 14 days, if not 21. And then you start antibiotics, which will be dictated by your microbiologist. When you do the debridement, check the implant stability, especially if it's a cemented implant. Make sure you burr the interface. Okay? That will tell you 2 things. Is the implant, not the implant cement, but the cement bone interface, is it stable? And the second thing is, remember, antibiotics elute from the surface. So if you've debrided the surface of the cement, then local gentamicin release will be much better. So you increase the volume of antibiotic delivered locally by burring the cement. So simple procedure, but it's worth doing. The other tip is go down to the joint before you start debriding. Occasionally, we have seen situations where people start debriding as they go in. It starts bleeding. You can't see the areas of interest, and that leads to all sorts of problems. Be radical. Okay? It needs to go back to healthy bleeding tissue and use plenty of lavage. Okay, you can use whatever techniques, you can use adjuncts, you can use povidone iodine, whatever you if you're believing in the Pavese strategies. But the key thing is plenty of lavage. We use chlorhexidine. Remember that when you've done a big resection, when you've done a radical debridement, you might need to change. For example, in knees, you might need to use a thicker poly. In hips, you might have to go for dual mobility liners. So again, if it's compatible, make sure you have had that on your side. Very rarely you have to go on to a constrained implant because your resection margins are so radical. The next controversy is about the exchange of mobile parts. So again, the Lausanne group showed that if you change the sort of modular components, the success rate is 91%. If you do not change, then the success rate drops to about 7%. However, there is always evidence to the contrary. So Gerritson's work showed that after 2004, the studies, there was no incremental increase even if you did not change the modular components. What my experience is that if you don't take the modular component, or if you don't take the head off, or if you don't take the poly off, then typically you cannot access the posterior parts of the joint. Therefore, your debridement is inadequate. So by definition, you need to do it, and if you're doing it, you might as well change it. But this applies especially to infections in the revision scenario, possibly, where long porous uncemented stems are there, and you might find it difficult to get some of the components. Closure is important, so hemostasis is key. I've stopped using drains. Local antibiotics, Stimulan role. Again, our knee colleagues use a lot of Stimulan, we don't. And then meticulous closure, obliterating the dead space. Stimulan was mentioned, it's absorbable calcium sulfate. Again, powder plus sterile. The main thing is you can use whatever antibiotics you want, you're not dictated by the cement compatibility. It has high levels of elution in its early stages, but there have been reports of increased wound drainage, heterotopic ossification, and in rare cases, hypercalcemia. So sort of a word of caution associated with it. Dead space obliteration. I often use tension sutures. If there is any issue with closure of the hip, then I would go back to sort of the old methods of closure and get tension sutures, and then those dressings are not disturbed for nearly 2 weeks. We've routinely used barbed sutures. There was a discussion about persistent wound discharge, and certainly with the barbed suture, glue, and steri-strips, the driver for that was early discharge and getting home patients on day case arthroplasty. But actually, we've not had issues with wound drainage as such. So I'd highly recommend those barbed sutures. Post-operative management, we give 2 weeks of IV antibiotics. Again, you'll have cultures by then, and depending on the antibiogram, then you can switch to oral antibiotics. Typically, the CRP needs to drop less than 50 in those 2 weeks. You monitor. We give antibiotics as dictated by our sort of microbiologists, and we have a dedicated infection clinic where we see all of these patients, where you have orthopedic consultants and the microbiologist with an interest in prosthetic joint infection surgery. Rifampicin was discussed. We use rifampicin quite a bit, especially in DAIRs, and there is literature evidence to support that in DAIR, without rifampicin, about 30 to 60% success rates, but with rifampicin, it improves to about 83 to 100%. Okay? So good rationale for using rifampicin. So in summary, your ideal patient for a DAIR is less than 3 weeks symptoms with a radical open debridement and exchanging the mobile components. Avoiding antibiotics pre-DAIR so you get accurate samples. 2 weeks intravenous and then 6 to 10 weeks of oral antibiotics. Stable implants and soft tissues are the key. Susceptible organisms, and you can quote a 75% success rate for your patients. There are reports of doing multiple DAIRs. I'm not a big believer if your DAIR has failed unless there is a specific reason that the DAIR was done somewhere else and you're not sure. I don't think a repeat DAIR is worth doing, and I would proceed to a single or sort of 2-stage arthroplasty in those stages. Thank you very much.